Okay, we're live. Go ahead, Todd. Take over if you would, please.
Thank you. I wanted to bring up the role of universities in this second hour, and I think I have a way to do it that will make sense. I was watching the MSNBC broadcast, and it was kind of interesting to me because Joy Reid was trying to make a point about the accessibility of the Biden Harris administration. So she talks about, well, Howard is not an Ivy League school. University of Delaware is not an Ivy League school. And so you see how accessible these people are. Now, as someone who lived 25 minutes from Howard for about 20, 25 years, I kind of laughed at that because I do understand that Howard may not be an Ivy League school, but it's definitely a center of the black elite. So when Joy Reid made that comment, I looked up to see where she went to school, and she went to school at Harvard, which made sense to me that she would not say that Howard was not an elite school. And that reminded me of the fact that Abby Phillip, who did a puff piece on uh, Vice President Harris on CNN, also went to Harvard. And so you have Harvard interviewing Howard, which is quite appropriate for the current moment because Howard, out of all of the HBCUs, plays a very specific role in the society and in Black America. And I think it's just something that we should discuss because many of us here are Howardites. We either graduated from Howard or taught at Howard, so we're familiar with the terrain. The most revolutionary people come from Howard. The most conservative people come from Howard. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up in that documentary between Abby Phillip, Harvard, and Camilla Harris, Howard, is that Harris's sister pointed out that Kamala went to Howard at the time where black people were entering into corporate America, and students would literally walk around carrying briefcases. And she said that Kamala was one of the people who carried briefcases. So when we evaluate what we now have, our contradictions are kind of laid bare here because, first of all, which Howard do we discuss? Right? One of the things that MSNBC pointed out, and please correct me, one of you, if I have the president wrong, she said that Andrew Jackson chartered Howard by mistake, right? And so she pointed out that a school that had been chartered by mistake by a racist white president now has produced a vice presidential candidate. Um, and so she pointed out that particular contradiction. But we're not talking about the contradictions of the Howard that we know of that is multifaceted, and now the Howard that will now be presented to the world as a result of this change now in terms of the black bourgeoisie. The black bourgeoisie now has an institution that they can point to that says that we have now the highest level that you can go that comes from our institution. So I wanted to point out that because there's so many different Howards. Right, you're right. What Majid was saying, which Howard do we discuss? The Revolutionary Kwame Ture Howard or the Kamala Harris Howard? Those are very two different Howards. And I think it's Josh Myers who wrote a book about the Howard protest in 1991, where he pointed out the two Howards and that April Silver and Ras Barak and others in Black Neoforce were trying to represent that other Howard. And the university's response was to call the police and that they were almost physically removed from a building, and it was only Marion Barry who saved them from being beaten by the police when they took over a building at Howard University. So Josh Myers goes into that in quite detail. So I wanted to have the panel kind of talk about the role of the Black University, particularly the role of Howard University, in maintaining this kind of hegemony, but also in maintaining a kind of revolution. So there's a real conflict that I think is permanent. I hope is permanent, and that's a whole another issue that we want to discuss. So anybody who wants to do that.
Well, let me just jump out there real quick, and I'll just say that I'm going to step out and say I think the conflict is overblown. I don't think it's as much a conflict as it is one-sided. I think we commemorate some of the more famous radicals that have come out of Howard or any other HBCU, but I think they pale in comparison, pun intended, to the far more, I think in number who are at best, liberal or Democratic Party acolytes. But in terms of producing radical revolutionary activity, I don't think Howard or any other university, black or white for that matter, has done all that much in that end, toward that end. I do think, as John Bracey pointed out to us at Africana a couple of years ago during the commemoration to Dr. Turner, and I since have gone back to at least read some of the book he mentioned, the William Corson book that came out, I believe, in the late 60s, early 70s, written by a white male, formerly or somewhat connected to the military, working on as a professor at the university, at Howard University, specifically to, in an undercover way, assess to the extent to which black students were becoming revolutionaries. And I think that what Bracey's point, if I understood him and I understand the point of the book, is that from the point of view of the state, there has always been concern that these kinds of collections of black people thinking might lead to problems. But and I think toward that end, they've done a lot to mitigate the potential for there to be problems. One of which has been pointed out in our former Morgan State colleagues' work, Jelani Favor's book on HBCUs, where he points out the specific intent of the state and those in power to defund black universities in the liberal arts arena and increase funding in the STEM fields, specifically with the idea that concentrating black thought on science, technology, engineering, and math would limit the potential for radical philosophy and ideology to take hold and would allow for a greater management of their careers. So all that to say, while we may be hopeful that radicals are going to emerge and point to some historical figures famously who have done that, those of the state have been carefully monitoring, plotting, and planning to assure that that does not happen. And I think that they are winning a decisive victory in that battle.
Well, I'll pick back up unless Sister Yele wanted to jump in. Okay, so ahead, sure thing. So I'll pick up on that point because in terms of understanding or at least grasping this particular moment in this nation state, and thinking about another notable of ours, that is Jared and ours, very close elder of ours, Dr. James Turner. He quotes Bracey, I'll quote Turner. So Turner said this when I, and I'm sure Jared, were younger graduate students at the African Center at Cornell, that all political regimes are sponsored and made intelligible by intellectual regimes. I repeat, all political regimes are sponsored and made intelligible by intellectual regimes. Why do you think the likes of Princeton professors and Harvard professors and Yale professors are busy scurrying across the internet on MSNBC and all these other outlets? Because they are the expert class that is there to reinforce, to comfort, but also to curate how we feel and think about the nation state. That's why they're called upon habitually, right? And so in the same way, both being a student, a graduate student at Howard, and being, I think my last year, I was I taught a class there. Howard, works the same way, however, for a different, demography, right? The way that Harvard works for a different demography, right? But the mission is the same. And so in the same way, people can point to Kwame Ture as being an outstanding member and therefore acclaimed, right, you know, for the people. In other words, Howard wants to claim Kwame Ture now, but did they claim him in 64 when he graduated? No, they didn't. The same way that we can think about Walter Rodney. You know, Walter Rodney is from the same place. And my wife is from Guyana. Remember, Walter Rodney could not get a teaching job at Howard. Remember that, right? That's why he went to Jamaica, then back to Tanzania and Dar es Salaam, right? So if Howard is supposed to be this bastion, this sort of incubator of sort of radicalism, right? Or radical politics, as much as we can point to the individuals who have come out of Howard, graduated and gone on to do notable, you know, things, we can point to a much more, I think, shameful record of the sort of ruined possibilities of other kinds of people. You know, imagine Walter Rodney on the faculty, right? You know, and so, you know, but Howard is really just a sample, a specimen, you know, of the broader intellectual landscape, the intellectual regime that is there to serve the nation state. And so you will expect, you know, places like Howard and other, you know, HBCUs to get behind this administration, as many did for Trump, because in their target, in their eyes, it's survival. And survival means partnership with empire. However, you know, the merits or the consequences or the casualties of that partnership.
That's quite thorough, Dr. Yoa. You know you have to come in on it.
Yeah, I didn't have anything super significant to add as a Howard graduate myself, a two-time Howard University graduate. Who considers myself on the radical end of the spectrum. I would say, you know, Howard University and other HBCUs were never supposed to be sites of African liberation. They just, you know, kind of to a point Jared made, are just sites where there happens to be a large convening of Black people who are thinking about things. And in that, people have held and created and to some degree had to defend spaces for radical thought to happen. And, you know, some of that doesn't happen on campus. It happens adjacent to campus. It happens across the street from campus. It happens in the homes around campus. It happens in the cultural institutions that feed into campus and that kind of lure students into other experiences beyond that intellectual project that Howard has committed itself to for reasons of survival and et cetera. Kind of speaking back to what Kwesi was just saying. So I'm not trying to defend Howard University in any sense, but really just talk about the fact that it really, there's it's everything in the Black world and it's polar opposite, right? So I think I heard that from Dr. Carr, who quoted someone else. We just have to come to, again, the place of acceptance that that's what it is. It is, and it's just simply a function of us all being there. Yeah. But it is a constructed space, right? There's an agenda that happens. Anything that is outside of that agenda is really incidental and really depends heavily on just the sheer willpower of the people finding like-minded people in that space.
Can I just quickly, because I saw I was asked about the book, I put it in the chat, and the book that I was talking about that Bracy encouraged us at that gathering to revisit is Promise or Peril: The Black College Student in America by William Corson. And if I could just quickly, I was just looking here at my scribblings in the preface. It says here that the unifying theme of this book is the proposition that the Black college student's future is imperiled on the one hand by institutional white racism, and on the other by the possibility of their participation in a revolution led by Black revolutionaries who have given up all hope for peace and freedom between the races in America. And then he goes on and says, I have examined the pressures that may cause Black college students to abandon their hopes of fulfilling themselves within our present American society and turn instead to the open-ended violence of a race war. And I've outlined the techniques available for Black revolution. In other words, he's writing a prescription of how to more or less cajole Black college students away from Black revolutionary activity, and encouraging white society to become at least nominally more open and liberal and inviting to, as I would interpret it, that class of Black college graduate. And then I will put the other book in the chat. I don't remember the full title, but the author is Jelani Favors. And there is a good interview with him at imixwhatilike.org, as well as a conversation with him and Josh Myers at imixwhatilike.org as well. So
I noticed the comment here about from Kat about her sister going to audition at Howard and because she had only studied West African dance and not European dance, she wasn't accepted. That is not unusual. Actually, when you study the history of HBCUs were determined, particularly in the early 20th century, to imitate European structures, even down to dance, even down to theater and art and all of these things. It's only as a result of the Harlem Renaissance period, which tugged against that to a certain degree, and then later on the Black Power movement, that Black universities tried to throw away or at least supplement the Western focus. I mean, this is why Howard University had a university struggle back in the late 60s about being a Black university, right? They wanted to disrupt the Western education they were being given and to supplement that with both African education, African-centered education, and also community education. So what Kat's sister's gone through is actually a normal experience. I mean, and I hate to say it that way, but I think it's quite true.
But again, it's not everybody. You know, that's the dance department. Again, it's institutional. It's an institutionally recognized department with individuals with the power to accept or deny who have that orientation. But then there is the African Drum and Dance Ensemble that I was a part of, in which there are dancers who came in with ballet training and had to learn how to drop it down a little lower and move their bodies differently in order to leave the Western dance tradition behind and kind of get into a different physicality for African dance. But we didn't have space. It was a student-led, student-run organization that we started ourselves, and we didn't have rehearsal space. I think we were in a raggedy classroom in the old human ecology building for some years. Imagine African dancing on like a laminate floor. Anyway, but the space was created, and there were faculty members who supported us very much. So again, it's all of the things. All of the things exist there, but there's the official Howard, and then there's the Howard that people create.
Dr. Burrows, I just want to point out that there are two questions in the ask a question here for Dr. Konadu.
Thank you. I think I even forwarded one to Dr. Konadu.
Oh, do you see them? I don't even know if you're seeing.
I saw one of them. Well, Jiva gave me one of them, so let me.
Okay. Well, if you guys are on it, I'll fall back. I just wanted to make sure.
Give that one to you, Dr. Konadu. Here's the one that I have. Dr. Konadu, you talked about the faultiness of American Western democracies and how we should move to a more consensus form of governance. Many African nations after liberation and independence adopted the same flawed Western models of governance as my native country of Zimbabwe did, which has exacerbated tribal identities. How can we bring about a resettling and movement toward more African indigenous forms of governance, both in the diaspora and on the continent at the community level?
Kwesi, you're muted.
Thanks, Ayele. Yeah, so what I'll do, I'll fold both questions into one. The question you mentioned as well as the one about the democracy. Precisely because much like the U.S. evangelist industry has been gaining traction in many African countries, through their missionary, the exploitation of their missionary theology. The same is true for peddling democracy, right? So we all, I think, remember Barack Obama making his African tour and chastising, African leaders, for their ineptitude in terms of, implementing, his notions of democracy or not. So what I was suggesting was simply this, is that because, put it this way, I'll stop that stream of thought. Put it this way. My thoughts about democracy is not an ideological position. It's an arithmetic position. The calculus doesn't work. So if you put ideologies aside, Republican, conservative, radical, liberal, you name it, the arithmetic doesn't work because you're always going to have 49.9% of people that are angry, right? The 70 million that Njiba spoke about earlier on, right? Or one McCain lost, right? Whatever, all those red states. So you're always going to have, this contentious and ongoing series of vexed constituencies who are going to look to exact, block, hinder, or undercut any particular move for the benefit of the people. And one of the other casualties of democracy as being peddled is that each incoming regime always seeks to eviscerate whatever mark left by the previous regime. That's why there's no continuity in terms of programs that actually benefit the people, right? And so you get this seesaw, this political seesaw between incoming and outgoing regimes. And so what you have there is no continuity. And what I'm suggesting is that both at the community level, and I know West Africa better than other parts of the continent, so I'll stick to there, that I just came back from Ghana 2 months ago. I was there in November. And what's remarkable is that, and Njiba, I'm sure, can testify to this, that at the village community level, people are behaving in this way regardless. I'll give you a quick story. This woman was walking on the street, and I'm in this region called Techiman, which is about 6 hours north of the capital, Accra. This woman's walking on the street. This guy snatches her purse, her pocketbook. He runs, around the corner. That's how far he gets. I count 7 to 9 people pounce upon him. They not only, hold him for the police to arrive, they chastise him with words and with fists. And then they give the woman back her purse and they escort him by foot to the police station, right? That's community justice. That's community action. That's community, period. That doesn't happen if you don't have community. In other words, there's a broad general sense of what is just and what is unjust, right? And whose interest that justice serves. And people will take it into their own hands because they know that there's a community ethos operating to support that action and also to pronounce upon those who break those, sort of communal codes that are laid out, right? Now, this is in 2020. So I'm saying at the village level, people are already operating on these values. And when it comes to politics, local politics, I visited a number of so-called chiefs who are holding, what we might call court, and they listen to community concerns, and they'll spend hours hearing out people who, something frivolous as stealing your cell phone, or someone, did not, pay for the cattle or sheep that they stole or they misappropriated, and they're hashing it out. It takes longer, it's more patient, but it's more human, right? It's not rushed, it's not a time limit. You're not worrying about whether your insurance policy will pay for this time. It is something that where I think the consensus model gives you a more long-term stability and continuity than the microwave democracy approach that is arithmetic and as illogical, because democracy thrives on irrationality. It thrives on it. You can't be rational. And by rational, I mean you can't be sensible and logical and fall for what you saw today in terms of the inauguration, right? And feel inspired. You can't be, right? So it requires a leap of irrationality. And so consensus takes us out of that particular haze and puts us into, I think, a much more clearer vision of what people on the ground are doing anyway. And so I think that's a great way to think about not only consensus as another approach to community and I think people's lives as opposed to democracy. But there's also a way to think about electoral politics and a way to think about places like Howard, because Ayala is absolutely right. There's Howard, the administration with their visions and their values, and then there's people who attend Howard. They're not the same, right? There's people in the villages, and then there's the government of Ghana and Accra. They're not co-equals. They're not coterminous. There's kleptocratic government in Dakar, and then there's people outside in the outskirts of the villages living their lives in very communal and in many ways, nonviolent, very progressive ways.
Dr. Conadu, I have a question for you because I think your analysis is fascinating. Then how would you describe January 6th? Is January 6th a bunch of white supremacists who are upset that their country's gone? Or is January 6th, from your point of view, then the total of that 49% not getting what they want over decades?
I'll say something that my daughter told me. My daughter, Afia, who is 10 years old. We were watching the news broadcast of the unfolding of that particular moment. And she said to me, Aja, which means father in Chi. She said, Aja, they're cousins. And by that, she meant this. The security guards who were escorting the so-called rioters, a 10-year-old recognized that they were cousins. Because it looked like a field trip with school children being escorted by the police, officers. It didn't look like an insurrection and a few fleet-footed, DC police being overwhelmed. It looked more orchestrated. And my 10-year-old, to her credit, saw that. She said, they look like cousins. They're helping each other, right? The police are not guarding the Capitol. They're escorting them, right? And so, to me, is the, it's a spectacle because it grabs our attention. It pulls us in emotionally, and it gives us this fake fight. I kind of think of it as how commercials work. All commercials have the same argument. They make the same argument, which is this. They present to you a problem, which they created. Then they present a solution, their product. Your rice not fluffy enough, you need Uncle Ben's poor boy rice. Your floor is not shiny enough, you need Mr. Clean Wax and Dry, right? And so, to me, that whole spectacle looks too staged, right? For dramatic effect. Sort of a last hurrah. And as Brother Jared said, Biden comes in as the hero riding in on horseback, right? With Kamala Harris on pony. And so to me, this is one of the...
Hold up, she don't even get her horse. She's on a pony. That's messed up.
For dramatic effect, right? Because he is the white male hero, right? And Danny Glover will tell us, you cannot make a film, a revolutionary Haiti, because there is no white male hero. This story needs a white male hero to assuage whatever feelings we had caught up in, the white male villain embodied by, we're told, Trump. This is simple Hollywood.
So the people from January 6th are what kind of people?
The people from January 6th are the people from 1619. When reportedly the first, which is incorrect, by the way, but reportedly the first group of Africans to an English, right, colony. But Africans were here, obviously, much earlier during the Spanish period. But that's a different topic, different time. It's the same people. It's those same, mashup of different kinds of European, becoming white, planters, servants becoming planters, right? It's the same mashup of these individuals who are part of the stage show. They're props. And we're the audience. And we bought tickets. And we are participating in it because now the movie is a motion picture that carries over into our lives.
That's very direct and very clear. Sounds like a media scholar, right, Jared Ball? All right. Anybody else want to jump in?
No, I was just going to remind that Africana Studies is interdisciplinary.
Right. That's right. Oh, that's right, because I would not have gotten in otherwise. That is absolutely correct. Anybody else want to add anything before I go on to the next topic? All right, well then let's go on to the next topic. Since we won, what should be our demand? Again, the event I saw with all the progressives on them for like 4 hours on Busboys and Poets, they had a list of things, but they talked in terms of vague, vagarities, if that's the correct name, because I'm always wondering when I deal with progressives, I always have a kind of question I want to ask them, that when I ask them that, they give me this kind of long answer, right? So the question I always want to ask is, okay, how are you going to punish these people if they don't do what you want?
So I just want to be very quick with my 2 cents on this. Yeah, and I want to bring back something that I think was funnily applied somewhere else. If folks remember the first Godfather, this is that moment. Whoever comes to you with a demand now for Joe Biden is the traitor. Because there is no demand at this point to be made on someone who already has won and who has already said he's not going to do anything. He's already said it's not going to change. He's going to increase funding to the police, continue AFRICOM. There will be no health care, no student aid relief. They've already reneged on the $2,000 promise they gave before the election. So look at the administration. Look at everybody he's dragged in from the Clintons and the Obama administration across the board. So I'm serious. The first black radical to go on TV and say, this is the demand we need to make. Now that that's the traitor. And I don't even like to use that kind of strong language, but I want to keep it in line with the language used in The Godfather, because this would be a treacherous moment to now say we are going to make a demand.
It's interesting you say that, because I don't know if it was yesterday or today's Democracy Now, but there was some white progressive on who talked about, oh, this is going to be such a great progressive era. It's going to be unprecedented because all we have to do now is fight for it. All we have to do now is lobby for it. And I'm thinking, like, with Biden, we're going to lobby with Biden. We're going to lobby with Harris. I mean, I don't see that really working the way I didn't see it working with Obama. I mean, if it didn't work with Obama, who understands the black male experience very well, right? How's it going to work with Biden? I mean, and that's the question I had. But the larger question is, we seem to have this kind of optimism, but we can't punish anybody. Like the right, they punish people. You don't do what I say, we're going to raise $1 million and primary you, and you're not going to be in office. They know how to punish people, but we don't seem to do that. We, meaning all of the left, not just African Americans. Anybody want to react to that?
Hold on, Todd. Can you repeat that? The last part? You're muted.
Okay, there we go. I was saying that the right knows how to punish people, right? If you don't vote the way they want, they will raise $2 million and primary you, and then you're out of office, right? But nobody on our side, quote unquote, and that includes white liberals, progressives, black progressives, etc. Nobody on our side knows how to punish anybody. So what do we do now that we're, quote unquote, back in power? What do we do? I just wanted someone to comment on that.
Oh yeah, I think that's why my statement in the report, I just think this is just a return to the usual racism and not so benign neglect. That's what we're headed for. I mean, and that's after what could potentially be another really volatile situation. I don't think we're out of the woods with that. And I say we because, I think we definitely stand a strong chance of being collateral damage even if it is cousins fighting, because we are so wrapped up in and so intimately close, having fought to be so close to these white communities. So that's something we can't, I don't want us to get into a different type of poppyism where we're really thinking like now we can talk about what's next, because we're not done with the crazies with guns and pipe bombs yet. Like, I don't think we're done with that part.
And while you were saying that, I looked at an email where Jesse Jackson's writing in the Chicago Sun-Times that Biden's inauguration gives us new hope and new energy. And he says, the movement for justice must continue to organize nonviolent protest, challenging the entrenched systematic racism that still pervades our institutions. So there seems to be not an African consensus, but there seems to be a white consensus or a liberal consensus that we're going nonviolently, we're going to lobby for change, and I'm still trying to figure out what that means. And we're going to lobby hard, and if we don't get what we want, we'll accept what we get and fight harder. Because that's always what I hear, that people are not fighting hard enough for these things. And I'm just wondering, like, how hard do we have to fight in order to get basic things that people say they want?
You know how I know nothing's changing and nothing is about to change on this particular political level? Did any of you catch the annual address from Dr. Jeremiah Wright at Howard University? He delivers a sermon around MLK weekend every year there, and he did it virtually. And it deeply saddened me. One, I for some reason fell completely out of the loop and didn't realize that.
No, the cliffhanger.
She froze? Is she coming back?
Yeah, we got to get her to start right at that point.
I want to hear this Reverend Wright story for real.
Because she just said, because I didn't even think he was healthy enough to preach anymore, to be honest.
No, he's doing the rounds, and I know he's doing the rounds
because the brother that was just talking about him the other day, that was speaking on his behalf, said he had a stroke.
Well, he was doing the rounds, and I know that because we tried to get him at the university I teach at, and they rejected
there she is. There she is.
Okay, Dr. Yohe, we missed everything you said after Reverend Wright made a sermon. You froze and you.
Okay.
So please start over. We want to hear it.
Well, it wasn't a super heavy point. He delivered a sermon that revolved around the spiritual. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child, and he is severely impaired on the left side of his body, and his vocal folds don't connect the way that they once did, and so he's just very different. But he did a good job considering his impairments. And I think what really devastated me was that he was talking about himself in many parts of this sermon, and his relationship with the Obamas, his relationship with the broader community, and how in both of their autobiographical books, the Obamas still trash him, even to this day, even in the latest works. They're still, Obama's been out of office for 4 years now, and yet he still feels the need to distance himself from Jeremiah Wright, even though, according to Dr. Wright's assessment, like, it's okay to say Black Lives Matter now, and it's okay to say white supremacy now, and it's okay to call out white racism and terrorism. Now it's like you said, Todd, it's trending now. It's trendy. It's to some degree acceptable to have the rhetoric, even if you don't have the politics to match. But his utter disappointment in the fact that this is still happening was tragic, because he was deeply hurt by what happened, and the fact that I think the Obamas are like leaning into this separation from the Black progressive community is a sign that no one in that camp is interested in moving in any different directions at all.
I read both Obama biographies, and here's an assessment of them that matches what you're saying. When Michelle Obama talks about her time at Princeton, she talks about being at the what she calls the quote the badly misnamed Third World Center, and she talks about her mentor being the director of the Third World Center. So she clearly got exposed to Black nationalism and Pan-African ideas, but she doesn't couch it that way. She couches it as a young undergrad, I needed an older mentor, and she was an older mentor. So it could read, it read like something out of an Oprah Winfrey approved book, right? She doesn't, she does a quick line about, that the mentor talked about apartheid because they had a major apartheid rally just a couple of years before she got on campus. But then that's really it. And I was reading it going, okay, so you wrote this, you and your 3 white writers, you wrote this because you wanted someone in Indiana to identify with it. You wanted somebody in Indiana to have connection to it. So she won't be able to connect to Pan-Africanism, but she'll be able to connect to, I had an older woman in college who showed me how to be an older woman, how to be independent. That is not unlike what Barack Obama does in his book, in which he talks about that his point of reference with dealing with public policy is his white grandmother. So when they go after Reverend Wright, particularly when Barack Obama goes after Reverend Wright, he goes after Reverend Wright as someone who he didn't know that Reverend Wright felt that way. And then when he did find out he felt that way, he felt betrayed by Reverend Wright. Because when you read the Obama book, Obama feels betrayed by Reverend Wright, not the opposite. He feels that Reverend Wright was attempting to sabotage his campaign by being outspoken and trying to destroy the advances that Obama was trying to make. And he felt very disappointed in that. And that's why when Reverend Wright did that press conference at the National Press Club, the press conference made sense to me. It made sense to people in the black press. It didn't make sense to any white people. Barack Obama finally just put down the hammer and just said, that's it on Reverend Wright. And the fact that he could do that to a major black spiritual leader and get away with it shows you how deep the Kool-Aid many folks, not Dr. Ball, but many folks were drinking in 2018.
Can I jump in real quickly here? There's another very much synergistic historical reference here between Booker T. Washington and what we were talking about earlier on, I guess in the green room, Hubert Harrison. Booker T. Washington, the de facto, leader of the people, his people, especially after his Atlanta speech, where he's praised and soon he'll be invited to the White House under Woodrow Wilson. But Booker T. Washington being the de facto, leader, and in many ways he's a precursor to the Obama, right? In many ways, too much to enlist here. But the short point is that, Hubert Harrison, is this major figure in Harlem, part of this cadre of diasporic Africans from the Caribbean, who they make Harlem radical, right? In many ways, right? Cyril Briggs, African Brotherhood, Hubert Harrison, of course, lays out a platform for Garvey and others. And so, in short, Hubert Harrison, who speaks about 5 languages, writes a piece, about Washington. Not unlike Du Bois, in his book Souls of Black Folks, a chapter on Mr. Washington. And Washington's, henchman, hears about this, and of course, Washington gets word of it. Even though Hubert Harrison is pretty much obscure and not a threat, Hubert Harrison is perceived and dealt with as a threat. And so Hubert Harrison is working at the U.S. Postal Service in New York. And, Booker T. Washington has his people, the white folks there, fire Hubert Harrison. And Hubert Harrison financially never recovers from this, right? And of course, Hubert Harrison's biographer, friend of ours, at least Jeff Perry, writes about this in the 2-volume in Hubert Harrison in particular. But I wanted to raise that to say that, this kind of strategy, is on sort of a loop because it works, right? It works. And what makes it work goes back to a previous question that you asked, Todd, and I think somebody from the the Chat Acts, which is really about constituency. When we think about the people, our people, right? Who are they really, right?
When we deal with Harrison, I just want to jump in and I want you to come back. In the case of Harrison and later Garvey, it was an argument over who the people, quote unquote, were going to follow, which Pan-Africanism were they going to follow. And David Levin Lewis does a great job outlining this: the Pan-Africanism of Du Bois or the Pan-Africanism of Garvey. And so there was a real fight over who was going to get the masses to join their movement. I just wanted to let you get back to that.
Sure. And the last thing I'll say on this note is that, and this I think circles back to Jared's earlier point in our first hour, which is really what is the texture or flavor of Black politics, right? In short, on this January 20th, whatever hope, folks, of the so-called radical end, which I'll come back to in a minute, have invested in the Democratic Party since FDR, when, so-called Black folks moved from the Republican Party of Lincoln, right, into the Democratic fold, that hope has been, vested in them that Democratic Party could be something that it never was, right? And that hope still remains because now that hope has become a habit, whereby so-called Black folks will chastise you, as it did my wife, to say, you better vote Democratic, right? That zero-sum game, right? If vote or dies, which we had a previous town hall on that. If folks who weren't here, please check that out. And so I think is that habitual connection to the Democratic Party and the consequence of that habitual connection without having a way to hold them accountable, meaning to make them pay, because they've basically, you basically sold the estate to Democratic Party. They have no bargaining chip, in other words, right? There's no bargaining chip. What do Black folk people have besides the vote? Nothing, right? And I think that distinguishes them from, the Republican Party, who have other kinds of chip in the casino, right? We're visitors to the casino. We're not regular players. And because the Democratic Party has basically eviscerated, almost every inch of any radical tendency, right? That's why the Obamas, can continually make that kind of inroad and statement without having a price to pay. And I would say this, whatever we think about radical, I think we need to discard that word, because really what people are talking about is that folks who say they're radical and people who are labor radical, they want healthcare for all. That's not radical.
Right.
They want people to pay, a humane living wage. That's not radical. So I think even the very language we use sometimes undermine the very simplistic and pragmatic things that we're calling for.
We're about to end, and I just wanted to end, being that this film One Night in Miami is so prominent. After I watched it a couple of times, I had to go back to the meeting, Jeff Sessions' The Meeting from like 30 years ago, which they made into an American Playhouse movie that people have forgotten, that you can find on YouTube, right? American Playhouse, by the way, which is an institution that Dewey Dash said, had American Playhouse not existed, I never would have been able to do Daughters of Dust. Anyway, there's a quote that the play Malcolm X says to the play Martin Luther King, which I think goes back to this punishment and reward, etc. And he says, if they kill me first, you have nothing to negotiate with. They have nothing to negotiate with. If they kill you first, they better not let me live. Now that's a fantasy statement, but it gives you the idea that, at least in terms of Stetson's mind, those two people understood how to leverage power and how to leverage punishment, even if that meant their own lives. And I think that is an appropriate comment in which to end our discussion on democracy and purple haze, because we are in the haze for real. We're looking around trying to see something that we're not seeing. So I would like to thank everybody. I'm sorry that my technical proclivities or unproclivities messed up the second hour. We will be back. And watch One Night in Miami. You must watch it so you can see what they're still trying to do to us in a very sophisticated way. I mean, I told the collective, I said, your timing is becoming so sophisticated now, it's almost invisible, right? So watch One Night in Miami. Go watch the meeting on YouTube. And yes, Dr. Majid, will please everyone join us next month for next month's edition of the Blacklash Collective. Thank you all so much, and we will see you next week. It's next month. Take care.